made sure that it was not going to disappear.
All right, it is 3:02. We are going to go ahead and kick off this Tuesday, April 6th, 2021 work session to order. I've got a couple board members still walking in, but in the boardroom in person, I've got Board Member Holloman, Board Member Marcette, Superintendent Bishop, myself, Elisa Vacalis, Board Member Mitchell, Board Member Donnelly, Board Member Bellamy, and on Zoom we have Board Member Hildy, and we have administration both on Zoom and all right, it is 3:02. We are going to go ahead. We have a work session agenda. We are ready to go. All board members are in attendance. The main purpose of today's work session was to get board members and the administration to come back after we have had the opportunity to go out and do community council presentations, community group presentations, the 2 town halls that were well attended and that we did, and any other conversations that board members have gone out and done. We've all had our email boxes with lots of comments and stuff like that, and we will hear public testimony more tonight as well. It is on our non-agenda items this evening with potential action items on the 20th. So for this purpose of the work session, it is a chance for board members to come back together and say, what have we learned from the community? Is there anything we want to change? Do we want to leave it the way it is? What do we want to do? What did we hear? And that's how I'm going to kick it off. And so if there are any board members, I know everybody's getting seated and kind of logged in and caught up and stuff like that, but are there any board members that have any thoughts from the last month of meetings? Board Member Bellamy.
I'll kick it off. And I met with several groups, our ELL family groups, Spanish, Hmong, Pacific Islander, Samoan, the Native Advisory Committee, the Alaska Literacy Project Peer Navigators, and I was joined by several other board members with the NAACP. So the community comments were amazing, very insightful. They had lots of questions, but they also had lots of input. So, and what I've tried to do is kind of combine them all together. So it's kind of a list. But the things that came up were similar to the things that we all heard in the town halls. Family engagement, how does that play into the policies? How to best support poor families, how to best support families whose child want to attend a charter or choice school. There was lots of questions and opportunities to engage around the definition of equity and the definition of racism as it's used in the policy. There was input on cultural responsiveness, cultural competence, advice or input around discipline, making it less punitive and more of a growth for some behaviors, not all. Let's see. Lack of understanding between groups of people on what equity is and what it's not. They commended the board on holding everyone accountable. Let's see. Questions around how the Alaska Native, the Native American, Alaska Native, Black American, and Japanese, Filipino, Hmong, how would the policy encourage or incorporate those? Just discussions, not necessarily curriculum, but discussion. And then I'll give a few more and then I'll stop. Because I think Dina and Mitchell and member Marset went to the NAACP event with me. Okay, so why don't I stop there, and then I'll just come back to if there's time after others have had a chance to speak.
All right, so being back in the boardroom, I am looking for actual physical hands, not blue hands. And Ms. Alicia, I do see you on the screen. So just, if you got one, just hands up for me and I'll watch for you. And so did you want to share some comments right now? I open the floor to you. Go ahead, Member Hildy.
Thanks. And I would will start with that. I think that's probably a smart way to do it. Thank you, Margot. I just talked to community councils and went to one of the forums, the first forum we had, and then fielded a lot of phone calls, kind of tied in with the election. It came up a lot with emails and phone calls. But the big one was, I think, how do these policies, help us improve our academics, focusing on academics, which I think is important for us to address. Why is one that Member Bellamy has addressed before is why is this needed if we have an anti-discrimination policy? A lot of concern on whether this will create racism against white people. And then some concern on does talking about race lead to more racism? And if that's what we're always talking about, does that perpetuate it even more? So I'm just sharing what we had. I hope we get it. Then we'll kind of talk about some of these things. Does that sound right?
Yes. Other board members? Member Marset? Oh. Okay. It's been a while. So I actually did MECAC, one of the town halls, and the NAACP with Margot and Dina Mitchell. A lot of questions around curriculum. What is that going to look like? Concerns, I think, on both sides about what that might look like. I do have a recommendation tonight, but I'll wait till everybody's reported on their committee meetings. With MECAC, they felt like the biggest barrier and was staff, just the moving forward, and change is hard, but they did feel that sometimes staff can be the biggest barrier. Let me see what else. I've received a lot of emails also, and again, big concern with the curriculum, which I think we should talk more about. And, one of the things that we kind of explained is that, we set the policy, but anything to do with curriculum or anything like that would really be up to Dr. Bishop and her staff into how we would incorporate this. I mean, I envision what we might do, but that's not my place to say what we will do. They were very appreciative of us being there. I think Margot covered most of it. Again, with MECAC, it was the suspension policy came up again, and about just maybe doing more kind of restorative or more ways, less punitive, more ways to keep our kids in school and that sort of thing. So that's probably it. Did any other board members have thoughts? Member Mitchell.
So Margot covered, Member Bellamy covered a lot of it, but I was at one of the town halls. I was at the NAACP. I was at the peer leader program. And, a lot of what we heard was that, there a lot of the fears that Member Hildy talked about. There seems to be a concern that somehow if we address equity for students who aren't receiving the supports that they really need, that somehow that's taking away from other students. So I think that's something that we definitely need to quell those fears. And, in an ideal world, we would have an IEP for every single student in our district. We would look at every student, and to a large extent, the teachers do that. Every individual student, where they're at, what they need for their growth. But the piece that really I think people are concerned about, there are the access issues with the choice programs and the optional programs and the AP classes and the tracked things, the Ignite, all those types of things. But the piece that I heard a lot was from families where they are in student groups that aren't as successful was around, we need more support as a family. We need to know, one woman, we were talking about the kindergarten readiness program and how much happens in those first 3 years. And she said, well, where can I learn about these things? I have a young child. Where can I learn about what I can do to help my child be successful once they start their school journey? So those things are not things that people are taught, and they're not things that people are often exposed to. So I think it really, to the extent that we can do a lot of family outreach, I mean, obviously this falls into the realm of once these policies are passed, how do we implement these things to achieve equity? But I heard a lot of hunger for, I need to know as a parent, how can I be more supportive? How can I help my students be more successful? I want my child to have the best chances. One woman talked about she's an immigrant and didn't have much schooling and expressed, I don't know how things work in the US. I look at my white friends and what their children do when they get home and the supports they have, and I can't offer that kind of support to my students. So how do I do that? So that is something that I hope that, I think that's beyond just ASD. I hope that as a community, we can all kind of lean in and help with that. Another concern that Member Hilda, you may have mentioned, I'm not sure, is people seem to be concerned that somehow if somehow the equity policy means that we're looking at equity of outcome and therefore it's going to be inequitable. And I'm not exactly sure what the logic is there, but again, that's another concern that I think we need to address and dispel. Any student, my children, every single student in the district, we can offer them opportunities as a district. We can offer them opportunities as parents. We can offer them opportunities as teachers, as support. But then at the end of the day, it's up to that student to step up. So are we going to have ideal outcomes for every student, even if we can put the ideal IEP in place for every student? Probably not. And we're never going to get equal outcomes across students because that's not the way people are. So I'm not exactly sure what that concern is, but I think it's something that we need to figure out and address.
Either members Holloman or member Donnelly, did either one of you guys just want to share some initial just feedback from the community? Okay. Did you have some thoughts, member Donnelly?
Well, I guess my feedback would center around the potential utilization of critical race theory. While these particular policies do not directly say those words, one of them does use what I would call something way beyond a dog whistle. Is critical thinking, the terminology critical thinking. That's more like a fire engine, the siren, than a dog whistle, and to raise concerns by the public. And the fact that we have placed these critical race theory books on our website with no counterbalancing thought or philosophy whatsoever, or criticism or critical analysis, I think has duly raised public concern that that is the ultimate intent of these policies. I share that concern with many members of the public that have raised it. And I do think that it's would be appropriate that if that is not the intent of these policies, that this board specifically state that in these policies, that it is not authorizing critical race theory to be utilized in our district.
All right, so one of the things I wanted to do was to reach out to all the members, start to get some feedback. I've heard a lot of the same things that all of you have in your different various areas, attending both the town halls. and some community council meetings and things like that. What we need to do is real quick as a board talk about process. How do we want to go about either offering potential amendments for the board to talk about? We can't vote in a work session. We don't vote to change things as non-action items. So that leaves, voting on potential changes up to April 20th is, how we've historically done it. So how do we have the conversations about, if somebody wants to bring up an idea to change, do we want to straw poll it, to try and get any idea of where, folks are at? How do we want to do this as a board, or do we want to wait for all amendments to come on April 20th? Member Bellamy.
I have two comments. I would like to respond to Mr. Donnelly's concern. He is the board member that brought up the concern. That's an adult concern. It has nothing to do with the policies. Dr. Stock explained that to him at the town hall, yet he continues to bring it up as an issue, which is his right to do so. But that has connected the policies to some pretty awful thinking that is not focused on kids. Neither is it even healthy thinking. And so I would like for Mr. Donnelly to tell us what he needs so that he can stop perpetuating that kind of thinking. Because that is not that is not our students' problem. That is an adult issue. It has nothing to do with the policies.
Did you have thoughts on process?
Oh, that's the other thing, sorry. I think I would like to hear, I'd like to see where people are, and then I'd like to also hear what amendments people are thinking.
Okay, and I know you had your hand up, Member Marset.
So I'm not going to be there on the 20th, but hopefully someone will take this up. But in our anti-racist policy, the last sentence says, instruction should encourage critical thinking on the history of racism in Alaska, America, around the world, and the current structural, explicit, and unconscious bias towards people of different races. For one thing, for a board, it's not up to us to say what instruction would include. So that's kind of a board policy versus management. My personal thought is, I'd like to see, I think that sentence right there would alleviate a lot of concern. Critical thinking is not the same as the CRT, but it does cause some concern. But the main reason is that it really doesn't follow the guidelines for policy. And I have something to back that up if anyone would like to see that.
Did anybody have any initial thoughts on?
I'm sorry, I didn't. Were you making a recommendation for a change?
That we eliminate that line.
The whole last sentence?
Yeah.
So what are board members' thoughts on, and we're not voting or anything like that, just what are the initial thoughts on, let you speak to it, Member Marset, and then Member Hildy, I see your hands.
And really, I just wanted to kind of share with this process. I had a long talk with Sonia Hunt because I've been struggling with this. This is a very sensitive topic for many people, and we've been hearing from both sides. And, I kind of thought about this, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could call this the golden rule policy or the anti-bias policy? That is what we want to accomplish. And this is just something I wrote. We all want children to grow up in a world free from bias and discrimination, to reach for their dreams and feel that whatever they want to accomplish in life is possible. We want them to feel loved and included and never to experience the pain of rejection or exclusion. But the reality is that we do live in a world which racism and other forms of bias continue to affect us. Discrimination hurts and leaves scars that can last a lifetime, affecting goals, ambitions, life choices, and feelings of self-worth. That's one of the reasons we're writing this policy, is for our kids. And those are the very reasons right there. And with 60% of our student population being non-white, there's never been a better opportunity for us to learn to live respectfully together and benefit from one another's wisdom and experiences. I have been receiving many emails all the time asking where I stand on these policies. Race discrimination is only one bias that needs to be addressed in ASD. Until we address all biases, our children will continue to face barriers that will keep them from realizing their dreams and feel that whatever they want to accomplish in life is possible. The other thing, when we taught, and it's not my place, but I've been doing a lot of reading on curriculum, and what I've seen, and we do have curriculum in our school district that is electives that teach Black history and those type of things. It would be impossible for us to do something for 120 languages. They talk about that. But what we can do is we can take our curriculum, and I'm certainly not telling anybody what to do, but we can take our curriculum and we can infuse Black authors and history and stories and all of those things that are necessary for all students to feel a part of that process. So those are just my thoughts. I just wanted to share them, and because I won't be voting and I won't have an opportunity to do that. So.
Thank you. Member Hildy?
Thanks. Well, on process, I guess my primary concern would be that there's time for the public to read whatever changes, if anyone has changes to make. I guess if it's just a small modification, that's maybe not super stressful, but I would hope that'd be an overriding concern, that people have a time to think about if it's like a different policy. For the most part, I think we put a lot of work into it. I mean, every board meeting I offered people to offer input into it. I think the questions raised, I think we have to address them, but I don't see a conflict with what we're presenting versus our board goals. I think the instructional equity one, if we actually honor it, we could actually advance our board goals on reading and math. I mean, that's been a challenge before, where superintendent has presented equity choices or decisions made rooted in that, and we said, no, we just want to keep doing things the same way we've always done them. So we can have the policy, but it's still dependent on the board to act in line with it, or agree with that value that we really want to improve our academic outcomes. I think it's really important that we address the public's concerns that have been raised, because some misinformation has definitely gotten out. Some personal opinions that people who maybe didn't participate very much in this process. I certainly had plenty of input, so I think everybody, this fall, they could have just passed this our board could have passed it last fall with the first draft and could have said, this is it. And no, instead it was like an educational process. I think I've learned things along the way. I think our public has, our boards had really good discussions on what we are talking about, what we aren't talking about. So I thank the other board members for that. So I guess I'm not opposed to Star's suggestion of removing that last line if it's something the board is interested in, but I would want to see amendments in a timely enough manner where it's just not like the last minute. You don't have to, but I think that would be, more useful.
Thank you. And I agree, if there are any major substantive changes, we might consider putting it off for one meeting so the public can take a look at it. But if there are minor tweaks or something like that, then we can go ahead and keep on our path. But it's until we go down this road, I don't have that exact answer or suggestion at this point. Member Bellamy.
Are we, tell me what do you want me to talk about? I have a couple of comments for both.
So, yes, responding to, she's put out a possible change. And we're not voting on it or anything like that, but
Okay,
we're
but we're
trying to
just-
get a sense for how
okay.
people are thinking so that maybe we have an idea
Yeah.
moving forward.
And
If you want to respond to Alicia, you can do that too.
Yeah, I would like to, I think it's important that the language stays in the policy. Because, critical thinking, you cannot take the word critical and have it. That's what we teach our kids to be, critical thinkers, analyzers. So to take it out of the policy might cause some people comfort. We clearly defined in each policy what we're talking about, but some among us continue to associate and only see race as skin color. It's systemic. It's structural. That is the beauty of this policy. It is not pitting colors, kids against kids. It's all kids. So if we can't shift from thinking of racism as a person and not a system or a process, then maybe we do have more work to do. But the policy as it is written is not to pit kids against kids, adults against adults. It is curriculum, but it's so much more. Yes, it's people, but it's not any one person. It's not any one color. We're talking systemic, giving ourselves and holding ourselves accountable to look, identify, and remove systemic barriers. How can that not be good for kids? And my other comment is I absolutely agree with Member Hildy. I don't know how many calls you guys are getting. I wake up with the call, I read emails all day, and I talk about this all day. I will not get tired because it's just that important. It's important to our kids. We cannot keep doing things the way we've always done them. We gave everybody an opportunity to give input. We gave everybody the opportunity to show up and speak up. And you can't just undo all that. If you were not part of the conversation, it's going to be pretty hard to have the understanding. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Member Merced.
My purpose in taking out that bottom line is not that it's not important, that we teach critical thinking probably throughout our school district. I mean, that's what we want our kids to do. But if you look at policy and management, and I was there for all the conversations,
yes,
but that's the reason we're doing this, because listening to people, getting feedback, this is our opportunity to say, I think maybe we missed something. Maybe we didn't catch this because it is important. But when I went back and looked at policy versus management, this was, questionable. And I think when we talk about instruction and how this is going to work and what we're going to do as far as the district, that really is Dr. Bishop and her team's decision. So no other reason than that.
Okay. So, I'm sorry.
Member Mitchell.
So Member Merced, I hear what you're saying. And, there certainly is, we took a lot out of the original draft that, we had looked at initially, however many months ago. How long ago was that? 6 months ago? 9 months ago. 9 months ago, because we did realize that a lot of that does belong in, the area of management. But I guess, first of all, I did not know that critical thinking was something that was a bad thing to do in education. I thought that from the history of education, that was one of the core things we want people to be as critical thinkers, to be able to look at a situation and really understand it. So I don't really understand that comment. But I think it's important to keep this in here. The school board does have jurisdiction. One of the board's duties is curriculum, and I think that it's virtually impossible to have something that focuses on anti-racism and dismantling systemic and institutional and, the different types of racism without looking at where we have come from as a country. And I think that that's something that has been really come to the fore in the past 40 years. I know that my mother's generation in Germany lived through World War II. She was born in 1931. So she was 13 when the war was over. And for about, 30 years after that, there was silence. There was silence in the schools. Nobody talked about the Nazi history of Germany. And it was like a festering wound. And my children's generation they're open about that. They are, they talk about it. Frankly, they talk about what led to those conditions that caused the Holocaust and, all of the horrible things that went along with that. And it's very important. It's very important to acknowledge that part of their history and confront it and make sure that they have systems in place that will never allow that to happen again. And I think similarly, it's important for us to acknowledge what has happened in our history and not whitewash it. And we're realizing more and more that history is written by the people, the history we teach is the perspective of the people who write it. And we have many, many, many voices that have so much to say about their take on our history. And we are now allowing some of those voices to be heard. And I think that's really critically important for us to, there are so many things about the evolution of America that we have to be proud of. And yet there are also many, many things we need to understand and come to grips with and address and fix as much as we can in order to be a healthy society where everybody really truly is equal. I was just reading a book about the Gettysburg Address and how President Lincoln's address changed the whole focus of the country and made the Declaration of Independence the primary thing that we uphold and the equality of everybody. And I think that's really critical. I think it belongs in this policy. And as we've had 9 months to talk about it. I think personally, I think it's important to keep it there.
I'm going to go to Dr. Bishop, who hasn't had an opportunity to speak yet. And then I got Member Hildy with her hand up and then coming back into the room.
Thank you. And I can share that I've had a discussion about this as well. And it actually came up not during the discussions that the board had over time at the governance. It actually occurred when we were preparing for the town hall. We went back to and just really trying to support the board in sharing policy versus administrative regulation. When we went back to the Council of Great City Schools documents that they shared with us, this was a technical error on here when it basically, if you wanted to go by that guideline, which we've been doing, that the policy basically is the 30,000-foot view and sharing about what instruction will be. Well, that is in a different policy when a board has a process for adoption of curriculum. And so essentially the technical correction for this in accordance with the documents that we've been creating policy and the board has, it actually doesn't fall into that. It falls into more of breaching into saying this is what will happen with instruction. And the board has a different series in its policy that speaks to how curriculum is done. And so I think it is a technical change more so than any kind of a value judgment. But I too learned about it later when we went back to talk about what's policy, what policy is not. And that came from the, being asked, are we teaching critical race theory? And I couldn't understand why. And then someone pointed to that. And then when we really dove into it more, we looked back at the original documents of policy, and it was a technical change. But again, it's the board's policy. However, the board would like to adopt it.
Member Hildy.
Thanks. So 3 points on, I agree with Dr. Bishop and Starr's reasoning on the part on it being policy versus, instructional, and maybe it goes in a different policy component. What was the other one? Oh, I don't agree that the last sentence could remotely get anyone thinking that we're talking about critical race theory. At no point has this policy process included critical race theory. The board has never discussed it. This is not anything to do that our board is weighing or part of this process in any ways. That's just somebody else's choice to add to this, but it's not, that is not an accurate representation of this process, and that people in our community are under that impression. I understand, but it is not correct what has happened or is in this policies. And then what, from the beginning, when we were talking about like what we heard from people, I failed to mention what I heard from children, which is really important to me in sharing their stories of experiencing racism and not feeling like they could speak up. And that was, that just is very compelling to me. Like I'm a minimalist when it comes to policies. If I had my way, we would only have enough policies that we can review in 1 year, and there'd be like 7 pages of them. But when I hear a child saying, I'm not sure if I can speak up about racism I'm experiencing, if this is something that's going to say in ASD, we don't support racism, that's an easy one for me. I don't understand that part. So that's where I'm on those.
Thank you. I think Member Bellamy, you had your hand raised, and then Member Marcia, did you have your hand? Oh, I saw her late, so okay, Member Bellamy.
So I appreciate the clarification, Member Marcette and Dr. Bishop. I guess because I still struggle with how to formulate policy, right? I do. I struggle because what I want to say, that's why this document went from 22 pages to 2. It took 9 months, but it worked. So I'm wondering if Dr. Bishop and Member Marcette, your thoughts, if we just put in the beginning of the sentence, the board believes that instruction should.
I would say that's how you go in and I'm guilty of this, I'll say it, where I say I'm giving advice, but you're really not supposed to do that either. You can express concerns and that sort of thing, but even if I walked into Dr. Bishop's office and I said, this is what I think, I'm not telling you to do it, but this is what I think. That really is, again, kind of infringing on her responsibility and taking me out of my lane. I'm not saying I don't do it, sorry, but it is.
And Dr. Bishop?
Through the president to Member Bellamy, it technically, you just have to decide, do we want to stick with how policy is written and uniform? It actually is from AJ's work. And so, and that's later, that's how we picked up on, that, oh, this doesn't exactly match, because I was through that. So, it depends if you want to keep it in, you keep it in, but if for the uniformity of how we do policy versus regulation, it's in the wrong spot. We could go to curriculum statements, and maybe it's tied to that, but saying that in this kind of policy, your instruction will be this in the district, it doesn't fit with the definition of policy.
And see, when I read it, to me, it means that we will give kids the opportunity to think critically about history. And you're saying that policy can't stipulate that. that the board can't have a belief or recognition that critical thinking about history is important?
Our desire for children to think critically rather than instruction will be on critical
Okay.
thinking.
All right.
Our desire as a board. What
So
are your
is it-
values?
The word instruction needs to,
We desire children to think critically.
yeah, okay. I'll think about that one. Thank you.
All right, Member Mitchell, and then Member Donnelly, are you trying to get into the conversation?
Yes.
Okay, because I saw a look, but I need something a little bit more than that. So I'll do Member Mitchell, Member Donnelly, and Member Hildy.
So I'm just looking at the 6000 series, where we do talk about students must learn to respect and work cooperatively with persons of all backgrounds. Instruction should help students realize the value of individual differences as well as the human dignity and worth common to all people. Perhaps this would fit into this particular policy. I mean, we also are pretty explicit about, science instruction, environmental education. I mean, perhaps we could put it into the 6000s if you feel that it doesn't belong in. What is the policy number we have on this?
I have to look at it.
0400.
It's
Okay.
0400.
Okay, so yeah, maybe it belongs in the 6000s.
And Member Donnelly, you're up next.
Thank you, Madam President.
Can you turn your mic on?
As a part,
Is your mic on?
it's on. Can you hear me? No? It's green, right? Oh. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Oops.
Is it back?
There it is.
Okay, all right. To explain the question posed by Member Hildy, why would people think that there was some linkage to critical race theory with these proposed policies? I'd go back to also a response to what I think was inaccurate statement by Member Bellamy, and that's no member of this board initially raised critical race theory. It was in fact first raised before this board by the director of the Office of Equity and Compliance. When she came before us and explained that she was in the process of recommending policies, developing policies for the Anchorage School District based on authors of critical race theory. And she specifically cited those authors. One of them was the author of this book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. That's a direct link initially raised by the administration. And when I subsequently questioned the utilization of critical race theory and those authors in developing policy, that utilization was defended by the director of the Office of Equity and Compliance, saying that this was something that we shouldn't worry about because it's being used by universities and other institutions and other organizations. And then when I discovered that we had posted exclusively pro-critical race theory books on our website, that the administration had done that, and I raised concern about that, and requested that we have a balanced approach, which is, under our instructional policy, that we should have a balanced approach to these kinds of controversial issues. There was no accommodation for any other point of view. No other books were posted. No other critical thought to critical race theory was posted. No academic articles, critical race theory, were posted. And I acknowledge that this is not curriculum, what's on the website of our Office of Equity and Compliance, but it is on our website. And when my 13-year-old daughter heard the justification that it was on our website was really only for adults and not for our children, her response was, "Daddy, they spent 2 months teaching us how to use their website. How can it not be for kids to look at their website?" And I thought that was pretty telling. I really did. And the fact that we still haven't put any counterbalance forward to this, but we have only one side of this particular radical philosophy being presented, raises concern, very legitimate concern among the public. This started as what we're going to use to adopt policy. Then the policy comes, and we've exhibited a clear bias towards this particular philosophy on our website. And then the policies come. And so I think that's a very legitimate, 2 and 2 is 4, folks. It's pretty obvious what's going on there. It's very, very practical to consider that as a danger. That's why I think that it's most appropriate for this board that if that's not the intent, why not just say that? Why not just say right in the policy, this policy is not an endorsement of critical race theory. This policy does not authorize the adoption of any administrative regulations that utilize critical race theory. And I think the issue would be pacified. If that's not the intent here, let's just say it. Let's be honest and say that. But if it is the intent, that's super concerning. And at this point, with the bias that's been exhibited by the administration, it's really hard to just trust them with carte blanche to adopt policies around this without those kind of sideboards and controls. And thank you.
Thank you. And we are going to have a book discussion a little bit later. Next up in the queue, I have Board Member Hildy.
Thank you. I think I lost my train of thought there a little bit. We were talking about that sentence on the board believes instruction. It could also just be the board values critical thinking about these topics. So we can do a something where the board values critical thinking, a value statement. I just want to state again, what people perceive is not accurate. I participated in this process. Critical race theory was not a part of this process. That it's on a tiny little book list is not concerning to me. I've read the book mentioned. It's not scary to me. Books don't scare me. I can manage to read things without being brainwashed. It's not a part of these policies. They're completely separate. These were board directed policies brought before the governance committee, went through the public process, lots of opportunity for public input, regular monthly updates to our community in the board governance report. So the process here has been open and has not had any direct link to anything beyond a board member, just as any board member can bring a concern forward. We don't have to say this isn't for critical race theory in the same way we don't have to list all the things it's not for. We just say what the policy is. We don't have to say things that aren't remotely part of this process. That doesn't make any sense at all. Then you'd have to list every single thing it's not. So that's a bit illogical to me. Thanks.
Member Bellamy.
If I might have a point of privilege to my co-maker of the policy, Member Mitchell. Was critical race theory a thought in your mind when we collaborated on these policies?
So I've learned a little bit about critical race theory over the last few months. I had never heard of it before. It absolutely was not part of it. What we based, as we all know, what we based this on was the commitment that we made, and I can read this to you all if you would like. All 7 of us worked together on our statement in response to George Floyd's death, and we worked on the wording of this together. Every single one of the board members voted in favor of this. And in that statement, we committed to developing anti-racism policy that will translate into programs and practices that will eradicate injustice and discrimination in our schools. Given that we all signed on to this, I assume that we all believe that some of this does exist in our schools. We said this will include an ongoing review of our current policies and educational approaches to ensure all students have opportunities to learn about each other, to respect each other, to value each other, and to create a more equitable and kinder world. We also committed to monitoring our instructional outcomes and systems of support to identify opportunities and remove any barriers that intentionally or unintentionally impact the opportunities of students based on the color of their skin. That requires a lot of self-reflection. We committed to listening to community voices to understand their concerns and hopes for just and equitable education. With these voices in mind, we will work together toward progress that will promote our mutual and interdependent goal to educate all students for success in life. We committed to pushing back against hatred, discrimination, and violence. And we said that we would make certain that the most vulnerable and underrepresented in our care learn and thrive in an environment that is just, free of fear, and filled with opportunities and systems designed to lift them up. This is what Member Bellamy and I had in our hearts, and the charge we received from our other 5 board members in developing the policy that we've spent 8 months working on, or 9 months working on. I was not familiar with the concept of critical race theory.
And thank you, Member Mitchell. May I continue? I like Member Hildy's amendment. I think I can support that addition to that last sentence. And my final comment is, I don't think, in my knowledge, that our senior directors, as wonderful as they are, I don't think they write policy. They might write procedures, guidelines. They don't write policy, unless I'm wrong. And we did have Ms. Hunt, our senior director, involved in the process in terms of interviewing students. And she shared that information with the governance committee. So I don't quite know how the comments of a senior director can infiltrate the work of the board. I just don't get that piece, but thank you.
Dr. Bishop?
Thank you, Madam President. To the board, I do want to share, and I want to share this publicly, how the word came up. When we provided the board a report on some of our equity work in our district, we shared the work that we're doing with the College Board. So we did what's called the College Board Equity Audit. They make the SAT. They have AP courses. And what their goal was to look at our students' abilities and achievement, and then look at which students are in your AP classes. And hence, it's looking at whom are the untapped students that have the ability, and they were all kids, all kids. It didn't matter their race, their student group, their ethnicity. These are the kids who were not tapping to be, if your goal was to ensure that all kids have the opportunity, and that was the goal, equitable access and opportunities were keys to the success in ASD. Through this process, and it was an understanding, and it was brought up that in the critical race theory, what they talk about were these 4 things: curriculum, instruction, desegregation, and school funding all have something to do with systemic systems that might impact. So she brought up that term and learning that through how to affect schools. The next time, and that was back September or something, October, that was way long time ago. Then we moved through this process. Lots of things in history have happened in our world. We're trying to understand it. Our teachers reach out, and other educators, to say, boy, we need to self-educate, because we're going to have kids back in our buildings who have been at home in the pandemic and watching TV and watching all these things happen. We need to have a greater understanding ourselves of what's going on in the world, and how do we understand all the ideas out there. So they had suggested book studies to personally look at books, study. They can earn college credit. they continue to go on. Those that are interested, the board hasn't been invited to sit in those. Now that there's, as a new one starts, you're invited to join that cohort. We have not had a board member join. We did add additional information to the website in regard to additional books to expand the ideas and the books that have been suggested after we had read them and put them on. So we're not against that, but for taking something off, I was interested that I don't think the board would be interested in censoring educators, books, actually books in general. So we continue to learn, we continue to understand what this is about, because the kids of, I think, our city deserve for us to be as educated as we can to understand just the different views and the different issues that are out there, the different understandings. And so I want to go on record that those are how those two items were brought up, so that it wasn't brought in a manner that said, we should put this in a classroom, or we're going to do this and this is the curriculum. Absolutely not. It was simply shared that the 4 components in getting to that equity of outcome are curriculum, instruction, desegregation, and school funding, all the things that the board works on, as well as administration, to run the Anchorage School District. And so, question the integrity, but I have always been as transparent, will continue to be transparent, and will continue to teach kids in ASD, all kids, to be successful in their lives. And it comes from figuring things out and getting good courses, and absolutely the best instruction and the best teachers we can get are going to bring our kids' learning to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. I'm just going to take a quick moment and just share a thought or two of my own real quick. I appreciate Member Mitchell rereading that statement that we all made and we all signed on to. There's nothing about that for me that has changed, but that doesn't mean I don't get to take a look at what we have in front of us and everything that, we're learning and, from the community or from each other or anything like that. That doesn't take that away. And so my commitment to it in its original intent has not wavered in any sense. I just want to make that very clear, that asking questions does not change that outcome. The other thing is, I did go back. It's on the October 6th. It's on equal opportunity schools. If board members want to go look it up, October 6th. And it's one of those, it's one of those things where PowerPoint comes to bite, where you have such a high level view, and so when you read the words on a PowerPoint, it can be interpreted unless you listen to the whole conversation. And so, I see where that's coming from, but I wanted to go back and find that for myself and go back and see it. So right now, Member Marcette has proposed a change, and we've gotten some board feedback. We can continue to talk about this one sentence, or if there are other board members that have other thoughts that we want to also talk about, I'm trying to make the space, and we can get stuck in one sentence, or we can talk about all board members' changes. If there happen to be a lot of suggested changes, then I would like to see them in writing, and as soon as possible for, all board members to have, in consideration, because that's one thing I have not seen by anybody yet. Member Hildy, you are up next.
Thanks. I don't have any other changes to recommend, but just at the beginning of this process, we share the community's concerns, and I want to make sure we have an opportunity. I would think the appropriate time is during non-action this evening to make sure we're very intentional in bringing those concerns out, or the praises as well, like the support. I don't think it's, sometimes you think about two sides. I don't think there's two sides. I think people have very wide diversity of views about equity and racism, and I think we can reflect that in the conversations we've had with our community over these last few months. So I just want to make sure that is the time that we are planning to address some of those things is during the non-action time tonight.
Heard. Member Marset.
So I actually wanted to kind of what Ms. Hildy said, there have been, with any change or people are fearful of what they don't know, and what their assumptions are and what they think. And so I do think it's important as a board to address the concerns of those that are concerned about this policy. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it, but that's our job as a board, is to address all concerns when presented to us from the community. So I would hope that we would be able to do that. Non-action whenever, but probably non-action would be better because we have more people watching. But I think that's important that we do that.
So I guess my question, after listening to you, Member Marset, and to Member Hildy, is it enough to just have a conversation at non-action that is, considered on a record that, where we lay out our intent and understanding behind this? Or is it making the words match the intent and making sure, and how do we do that when we know there are a lot of sides, to this? And I don't know that there's a lot of sides to, anti-racism or racism. I think it's just some of the other minor nuances. I think we can all say, this board rejects all forms of racism, unequivocally, so I'm just trying to find where the board thinks, is it a conversation at non-action, or is it actually changing parts and pieces or components? Yeah. I'll go Marset and then Mitchell.
So, with the media, with everything that's going on, people hear things. They don't know what's truth and what's not truth. I mean, we're inundated with all kinds of information. I mean, somebody sent us an email that said, my child is not going to apologize for being white. I mean, these are things that we're getting because people think, based on what they're hearing in the media, what they think is happening. I certainly don't think that's not in our policy. But these are concerns that individuals have. And we just have to assure our community that we are doing what's best for children and that we're not pitting anyone against anyone else. It's about all kids.
Agreed. Member Mitchell, and then Andy, you're awful quiet down there, and you're not normally this quiet. So I am after Member Mitchell speaks, I am coming to you. Oh.
Well, I appreciate President Michaelis, you wanting to get this, respond to everybody. I think all the board members want to respond to what we've heard in the community. I personally still think that what we wrote is appropriate. I think that the concerns that people have raised are not things that these policies state, so I think we need to explain that. And I do agree, so I guess I'm saying yes to all of what you said. I think it's important to, during the non-action time, explain why we like the way that this has turned out after 8 months and the concerns we've heard and how, whether we think this needs to be changed accordingly. But I also agree, or I guess I should say, and I also agree that if there are board members who think there should be significant changes, we should discuss that tonight. I personally don't want to be blindsided with amendments that make major changes when this is an action item in 2 weeks.
Member Holloman.
Well, I don't have too much to say, but it does mirror a little bit of what Member Mitchell said. We're not pouring concrete or building a building with this. As we all know, the board comes out with wonderful ideas, and routinely we have to wait until the administration screws it up, and we have to go back in and correct them and tell them what they're doing wrong. And I foresee that this will happen in a similar way. We are stating our intention very clearly about why we feel like passing this, I have a lot of confidence that the administration won't screw it up. I keep forgetting that the mask obscure humor sometimes. I apologize for that. That was said tongue in cheek, but no one can see it. But it may not go exactly like we want, just like everything else in life. But I do think it's worth saying why we are passing this policy and why it matters so much. And it does worry some people, and I totally get it, but it's long overdue, and it's time we move in this direction.
Thank you. Any other board members have any, final thoughts to share? And is that where everybody is on this particular policy, or were there thoughts on the instructional equity policy also? Member Bellamy.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to capture Member Hildy's amendment, her edit for that last sentence.
I just said the board values versus the instruction should include.
Okay.
Yeah, instead of instruction should encourage, you would just say the board values.
Okay, thank you. Member Marcette, I know you wanted to strike the whole thing with that. Okay, okay, thank you. That's all, Madam Chair, thank you.
Member Donnelly?
Just wanted to clarify that I worked really hard on written amendments to this policy, submitted those to the governance committee, extensive written amendments in technical form even. And so I participated extensively in the process of the development of this and put it in writing, what my concerns were months ago.
Did any other board members have any? Oh, Member Hildy, thank you.
And I would thank Member Donnelly for his participation and clarify that we were very intentional in including those in the meetings where we discussed it. So not always able to attend, but certainly submitting things in writing is very helpful, and I appreciate that. And we were very intentional in trying to reflect what your concerns were. So thank you.
All right, any other board members' comments on either the anti-racism or the instructional equity policy?
Can I just share one thing that came up? There were actually a couple of things relative to barriers from the community. One was language, the other was opportunity, and the other had to do with mental health services, but they didn't like the mental part. That really was part of the goals and guardrail discussion. I'm just sharing because I said I would. And the other had to do with my only other comment was that I did not meet with of the 10 groups I met with, and probably that I went face to face with, I had no objections. They only had questions. And then, those who are opposed, it breaks my heart when a parent tells me that, or a parent writes that their child will not apologize for being white. Well, I can remember when my child came home and she didn't want to be Black. But we worked with what we had. I gave her all the input and support that I could to make her understand that her skin color, Black, white, brown, that is not what's going to define her. And so as parents, I absolutely understand how that goes. That is not the intent of this policy. It is not the intent. It is not to divide our community. It's not to divide it's not to stigmatize our staff. It is for us to do the best we can for all of our kids in giving them opportunities. If there are barriers, this gives us the permission and the accountability to look and see and then dismantle if there are barriers for every kid, regular, special, little kids, big kids. So I am sensitive to those kinds of comments from any parent. The other question that came up was from several parents. Is this policy gonna, give my kids some kind of crutch? Well, absolutely not. That is not the intent. So I just think as a board, our job is to govern, and we do that through listening, and then and explaining, and then we do what's best for kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Donnelly.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to clarify my two primary concerns with the BP 04400, the way it's drafted now, are the last sentence and the utilization of the term critical thinking, and the term identify and redesign any racially inequitable policies. And my concern with that is, I think a lot of people of goodwill think that that is an appropriate term to use there. The problem is how inequity has been misused around the United States lately. As we know, Harvard University uses the term equity to discriminate against Asian students being admitted to Harvard. They admitted it. The Trump administration brought a lawsuit against them on that fact. Of course, the Biden administration subsequently dismissed it. But the basis of that racial discrimination, intentional, admitted, against Asian students was equity, saying that too many Asian students were going to get into Harvard if we didn't discriminate against them based on race. So that's why all across America, people are concerned when they see the terminology that's different than our traditional terminology of equality being replaced with the term equity, because we see how it's been misused by institutions as respected and historically prominent as Harvard University. And so I think that most of 90% of this proposal I'm very supportive of. I particularly am grateful for the addition here of the board rejects all forms of racism, because I think that is consistent exactly with where I'm going. But I'm just trying to explain why the public would be concerned with the use of the terminology equitable.
Any other board members with comments on policies before we move on to our next topic of our work session? All right, not seeing any. Number 2, adult resources for self-understanding. This is brought on from a conversation that was started at the last school board meeting, and it is talking specifically about the books for self-understanding. It's come up at our town hall. Member Donnelly's referenced it several times, so just wanted to circle back around to give ourselves the space and time to have the conversation here. If there's any questions, if the administration had anything they wanted to talk about, but just have the conversation real quick. Did you want to go first or just?
It's okay.
Okay. Member Hildy?
Yeah, I think we've already had this conversation. Dr. Bishop laid out the book list, the amendment to it. It's just adults reading books. It's not. I think we've already had this conversation lots of times, in fact. So I'm ready for us to move on to maybe math and reading and other things to talk about. But it's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Member Marcette?
So I actually testified when my kids were in elementary school about a book that the parents wanted banned, that they were using in 3rd grade. And I don't believe in banning any books. I do believe that you read books for understanding, to understand a different way of thinking, so that maybe you don't agree with that thinking, but it educates you. It makes you more knowledgeable. But I do have to agree on one point with Mr. Donnelly, and that is if we're looking at books to, and it's not like I want to promote white supremacy or anything, but and I guess maybe because of the topic and what we're looking at, they're appropriate. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, should we have not had a more rounded list, I guess? That would be my only concern with that, is that maybe we should have a more rounded list because, well, I'll just leave it there.
Dr. Bishop, did you want to weigh in?
Sure. I think Katie Grant is just going to pull it up. Some suggestions by Martin Luther King were added, others by Lyndon Baines Johnson, as well as Alaska Native. Books were added to the list to have a broader sense. These were also suggested books. This site wasn't meant to have a dissertation of arguments on either side. It was really simply meant for, again, self-education. I paused on, I was asked to remove it, and I paused on that. I was asked to put the link, which is appropriate. It's on the bottom there, that this is not ASD curriculum. It is, simply requested. At this point in time, and especially when we were receiving such communication that the idea of censoring books that people asked to read and to share, and these are simply just books to read. And I mean, that's where they are. I'm not exactly sure. This isn't to have a battle on a site or a debate.
Member Donnelly?
So in debate, when you have a subject and it's specific, but somebody tries to oppose you in the debate by creating an argument you never made and attacking that argument, that's called a straw man. I have never advocated for censoring or banning these books. What I've stated is that their presence without any counter academic thought whatsoever, no balance, is inappropriate. I continue to feel that. I think it's evidence on its face. I mean, there are very strong, and I've provided to this board, very influential authors. African-American Columbia University professor being one of them, that are highly critical of the content of some of these books. And the public deserves to be aware of that, just as they apparently deserve to be aware of these books. I think we need to have a full academic, fair approach to this subject if we're going to have it on our website. And we need to put up there the opposing points of view. That's what I've been driving for since the first time I observed this. It's a very different thing to say, well, these are just for people to read if they want, versus using a taxpayer website to put only one political philosophy resources on it. That's just not what we do with government in this country. That's not right. And there are some very clear, very reputable counter opinions to these books that belong to be there in the interest of basic fairness. And by the way, none of them have anything to do with white supremacy. They have to do with equality, equal justice under the law, the actual academic viability or efficacy would be the correct word of some of these publications, which are fraught with logical errors, misrepresentations of history, and radical partisan bias. in direct attacks against one political party in a complete vacuum for any recognition of the comparable culpability of other parties. That's just not what we do in America with our government websites. So I think we need to put something up that's available by very respected authors that is directly critical of these books.
Member Hildy.
Thanks. I would make 2 points. One, I think this issue is moot. The website has been updated to change it to be more views. Two, this is not under the board's authority. The superintendent could put a list of her favorite beach reads up on the website. Like she gets to decide what goes on the, on the website. That's not the board's management authority. But this has been resolved. So I don't understand this continued time spent on this, very extensive, ongoing time.
Member Bellamy.
I have tried to understand the concern with giving employees what they ask for, giving them the opportunity and trying to not just provide, to give them space for their own continued understanding. How can that be? There is no counterbalance. I mean, in political, how does it become political when you give people what they're asking for? Adult people. This is not curriculum. So I agree with Member Hildy. It is not curriculum. It's not our jurisdiction. The best we should do is to seek to understand why the list exists. And I don't know how Dr. Bishop can explain it anymore. I just don't. I mean, as an adult, I should be able to choose or not choose a book off the list if I want it, if I'm interested in those subjects. And if you don't like the book, don't read it. For me, it's just that simple. We're just wasting time here.
Member Marzette.
Just for clarification, because I do tend to say things out of context, that was an example. I mean, not even a good example, but when I talked about well-rounded, I didn't mean books on white supremacy. So I just want to say that.
All right, so I'm not seeing any other hands raised or any other comments to come up and be presented. It is 4:30. I know that we have an executive session that we can transition into with a motion.
I move that we transition into executive session for the purpose of negotiations and
legal update.
Thank you.
I have a first and a second. Thank you, everybody, for attending the work session. Look forward to the continued meeting tonight, and we are now in executive session.